for me to have this chance, and let me talk. Let me just start. Yeah.
Now you have to share your screen.
Okay, that is a very good idea. And then that is now gone. Nu får göra den och så ska vi se, kan jag inte få till, och här ska det vara skärskriven. Den. Och då, yeah, so this should be it. And then I should be
I see your desktop now.
Get that one, and then I should be able to get that one. Everybody is okay now?
Yes.
Yes.
You see? Okay. Phonation types and some physiological and acoustical aspects. So phonation types is an aspect of the voice source. Phonation is something that happens in the glottal area, and the voice source is a name for the glottal airflow, the pulsating airstream through the glottal slit. Okay, the voice quality, the quality of the voice is determined, as you remember and know, by two main factors. One is the voice source, the transglottal airflow, and the other one is the formant, the resonatory aspects of the vocal tract. And the voice source itself is relevant from several points of view. One is clinically, because if you get some voice problems, it is very rare that it is the tooth or the tongue or the lips that get sick. It is more likely that it is the phonatory function, the vocal fold vibration function that gets hurt. So, and voice source is therefore a main theme of the phoniatrics and laryngology. It is also, of course, quite relevant from a pedagogical point of view, because pedagogics has as an aim to make the use of the voice optimal. So that is a question of the voice source. You never get problems with your tongue because of singing too much. It is the vocal folds. And the third aspect is, of course, expression in speech and in singing. And the voice source is an important vocal instrument for expressivity. Okay, so back again to the voice source. There are three physiological control factors for the voice source. And one is the subglottal pressure, the air pressure in the lungs. We use that for regulating the loudness of the voice. Then we have the vocal fold length and tension, and that is our tool for tuning the pitch of the sound. And then we have also glottal adduction. That is a very important survival function, because if somebody is joining the inhalation air and wants to invade the lung, we have a very quick mechanism that closes the glottis and starts coughing. So glottal adduction is quite quick and very forceful. If you lift a piano, you close the glottis very, very firmly in order to stabilize your chest so that the arms have stable and reliable support. Okay, so that is some aspects. The three physiological control factors for voice source. Now, a voice source can be described in flow glottograms, and they show glottal airflow versus time. So here we have time, and here we have airflow. And you could see that the airflow is 0 for a while, and then it rises to a peak, and then it goes down to 0 again in typical phonation. So glottal airflow versus time is shown by flow glottograms, and I will talk quite a bit about flow glottograms. It is unlike the spectrum it is a physiologically meaningful representation of the voice source, because you could see the point in time when the vocal folds part and when they meet, and you can then see how long the open phase is and how long the closed phase, and then of course also the period time. Okay, I will expand quite a bit about these aspects of the flow glottogram in the following. But let me first tell you how you could derive a flow glottogram from an audio signal. It is done by inverse filtering. And inverse filtering is taking the start point in this mechanism. You have the pulsating airflow with its spectrum, and the spectrum tries to travel through the vocal tract, and the vocal tract is a resonator with a number of resonances. So the frequency curve of the vocal tract goes up into peak at the resonances and then in valleys in between the resonances. And the resonances are called formants. And then the partial that hits a valley in the frequency curve of the vocal tract becomes weak in the radiated sound, and the partial that hits a peak, a formant, in the vocal tract becomes loud. I think that has been chopped off in this graph. Anyway, now inverse filtering, what is that? Well, that is then the idea to process the sound by a filter that has the vocal tract frequency curve turned upside down. So here you see it. You have the radiated spectrum and the frequency curve, the response curve of the vocal tract. And then inverse filtering is that you add a mirror image of the filter, and that is then called inverse filtering. So then you could take the radiated spectrum, filter it with the inverse frequency curve of the vocal tract, and then you get the spectrum and the waveform of the glottal airflow. So that is then inverse filtering. Okay, I would like to invite you to a little demonstration, because I happen to have filter, an inverse filter, and I have this. You see the oscillogram now?
Yes, we do.
Do. And then I take a mask because I want to analyze the flow. That is, for technical reasons, more practical than to analyze the air pressure. Both is important and possible. But this time I take the flow, I catch it in a flow mask, and then I could see the flow here if I breathe. Okay, but now if we look at the flow signal that goes through the mask, it looks like this. And then I could set some two knobs here to eliminate the formants. And here is the first formant. I turn the first formant now. And you could see that the closed phase is then, let me freeze it. Yeah, here you see the closed phase, and here you see the open phase, and you see that the pulse is a bit tilting. If I vary the pitch, the period will come dense, more dense in time. Okay, so that is inverse filtering. Let me now go back. Maybe I should turn it off so it doesn't get insulted. Stop. Yeah, back again, demo. Now, a flow glottogram measures. How could we measure the flow glottogram and the voice source characteristics? while one is the period, that is boring, that is self-evident. And then we could measure the pulse amplitude, which is much more hot. And then the closed face is also nice to know. And then you could also take the derivative, not the flow, but the change, the rate of flow change. And that is taking the derivative of the flow glottogram. And then you get the most remarkable and most important aspect of the voice source, and that is the speed of flow declination. And that is then the negative peak of the derivative of the flow glottogram. So that has a name of its own that I will talk about a lot, and that is the maximum flow declination rate, MFDR. That is the steepness of the trailing end of the air pulse in the flow glottogram. That's it. Okay, and then we could also take a little spectrum. We can take the narrowband spectrum of the flow signal, and then we see the source spectrum, the spectrum of the voice source, with the first two harmonics or partials of the voice source is particularly relevant, and they are called H1, H2, and it is the level difference between them that has been widely used as a characteristics of the voice source. So that is it. A lot of measures on flow glottograms. Okay, so let me now talk about what happens with the flow glottogram when you change subglottal pressure. Subglottal pressure, what is subglottal pressure? I told you that it is our main tool for regulating vocal loudness. And I have here a gadget from Glottal Enterprises, and it is actually a little tube attached to a little meter, and that means that you could put your pressure into the tube, and then it also takes an average across time of the pressure. So if you now the point with subglottal pressure is that it's not necessary to take a little hole in your throat in order to measure it. Fortunately, you could also take the air pressure during the P occlusion for the consonant P, because then P is an unvoiced, so that means it is produced with open glottis, and if you have the glottis open and the mouth closed, you have the lung pressure in the mouth. So if I say pa 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 pa, yeah, I think you see the.
Sorry, Johan, are we supposed to see anything now?
Yes, you should see.
I don't think we do.
Paulina, if you see it on
you are very right. Thank you
webcam.
for reminding me. You should see. What should you see? You should see that one. No, not that one, but the camera itself. So I thought you could see it in my little image up in the corner. Do you see that?
Yeah, fine.
Okay, so here is then the image of the Marie där. Pardon. You see, the needle is sitting at 5 centimeters of water column. And if I make a louder sound, do this one, okay? And then I take the full screen, and you see now? You see?
Yes.
Yes, we see your slides.
Okay, so we were there, and let me see. I could now make a demonstration of varying subglottal pressure on the flow glottogram, and then I go to the oscilloscope again, and I should now vary subglottal pressure, that is to vary the loudness, and you could see how the waveform differs. And then I should do run there, and it's running. We could take the trigger here somewhere. So. Okay, so very simple demonstration, but I like it. As you could see that the flow glottogram changed dramatically as I changed the glottal pressure. Some examples: 80 decibels at 30 centimeters distance. The typical flow glottogram looks like this, and at a bit weaker subglottal, 20 centimeters, 15 centimeters, and then 8 centimeters, and then 3 centimeters. So you see there is a huge difference, of course, because the sound of the voice is varying. Now, I talked about the derivative of this flow glottogram, and if we look at the derivative, we will see that the sloping of the trailing end of the pulses will get bigger and bigger as we increase subglottal pressure and vocal loudness. And here you see the derivative, a bit dirty, the derivative as always, but you could see that the peak here is the slope is very steep in loud and is very gentle in soft phonation. Okay, so much. The effect of varying subglottal pressure on flow glottogram, well, we could say then, as we vary subglottal pressure, the steepness of the trailing end of the pulse it gets more and more steep. And that means that the derivative gets more amplitude in its negative peak. Okay, so now let me see subglottal pressure and sound pressure level. The negative peak of the derivative of the flow glottogram, that is actually sound pressure level. So we plot sound pressure level as function of subglottal pressure here, and this is what you see. So here is a lot of phonations on the one and the same vowel at the different subglottal pressures. And then you could see that you could approximate the curve with a line, and that allows you to ask a very fascinating question, namely, how much sound pressure level do you get for 10 centimeters of water column? And the blessed thing is that in most cases, people get 75 or something between 70 and 80 decibels sound pressure level at 30 centimeters distance for 10 centimeters of water column. Okay, you could also pose another question, and that is, how much do you get, how big an increase of sound pressure level do you get if you double the subglottal pressure? And then you have a doubling from 10 to 20, for instance, and then you get about 10 decibels, mostly a bit less, but sometimes a bit more than 10 decibels. So doubling subglottal pressure, that tends to yield 10 decibels increase of sound pressure level, provided that you keep other things constant, like vowels and things. Okay, so subglottal pressure controls the sound pressure level, but what is the flow glottogram? What flow glottogram property controls SPL? Well, I tell you, it is the maximum flow declination rate. So here we plot sound maximum flow declination rate versus sound pressure level, and then you get this kind of data from from voice. This is high pitch, and this is middle pitch, and this is low pitch. So you get quite high correlations from the maximum flow declination rate and the sound pressure level of the sound produced, provided that you keep the formants constant and the pitch. Okay, increase of MFDR causes increase of sound pressure level. And then we could also do the failing correlation between the maximum flow declinations and subglottal pressure. And then you get very nice straightforward equations, linear equations that that you see depend on the pitch, because this is low pitch, middle pitch, and high pitch, but they are quite straight. And I will tell you, this is a question of singers. If you take non-singers, they are a bit more irregular and do a lot of things more than you ask them to do. So you get rather dirty data. But the singers must be able to vary one phonatory dimension at a time. Imagine a singer who would do like speakers. If you ask a speaker to speak a bit more loudly, yeah, they speak more loudly and they also raise the pitch. But that is not acceptable from singers. They must be able to increase loudness without changing the pitch. Okay, enough about that. Subglottal pressure increases that cause MFDR to increase. Okay, so summary now, you have the steepness of the trailing end of the air pulse that is then determining the MFDR, and then thus the sound pressure level. Enough about that. And a bit more about spectrum. I could then probably make a little demo if we are lucky. I should then have the spectrum, a real-time spectrum, and I could probably get it running. And you see the spectrum, do you?
Yes.
Okay, so then I could vary my vocal loudness. And you could see that the spectrum partials do not sit on an elevator and travel up and down. It sits on an elevator, the floor of which is tilting, and it is tilting less for loud, and it is tilting more for soft phonation. So if you look at what happens here at 500 hertz, it's about 10 decibels, and here at 3 kilohertz, it's about 20 decibels. Enough. So back again to law and order. We go to this like this. Okay, so this is a bit more organized information about the same information, but more organized. Long time average spectrum of running speech. This is loud. Red is loud speak, and dashed black is soft speak. So 15 decibels here is typically about 1.5 times as many decibels at 3 kilohertz than at 500 hertz. That's typical. Okay, enjoy the effect of spectrum slope. Then I would like to introduce the MADDE synthesizer together with the spectrum, and then I would like MADDE to clear its throat. Yes, and you could hear him.
Yes, we can hear.
And I could vary the spectrum slope here, and you will hear how it sounds. Okay, so most people find that this is a rather convincing demonstration of loudness variation. And of course, it is logical that we pay a lot of attention to the tilting of the spectrum, because that is not affected by the room resonances, while the sound pressure level is very much affected by irrelevant aspects such as room resonances, and also where the partial is in relation to the first formant and other formats. Okay, so that is the that's a nice way of finding out the perceptual relevance of something that you find by acoustical analysis. I love to make synthesis of singing. Okay, summarizing then, subglottal pressure affects a lot of things in the flow glottogram. One is the MFDR, the steepness of the trailing end of the air pulse. Another thing is the duration of the closed phase, which actually looks like this. It saturates at higher pressures and has a very big effect on low subglottal pressure. And then, so that is the duration of the closed phase. And you saw that when I varied vocal loudness in the inverse filter. The flow pulse, the amplitude of the flow pulse we have here versus subglottal pressure. So that is also very much affected by subglottal pressure, as you saw in the demo. And here we have the amplitude of the fundamental. I will return to that in a little while. And then I also just mentioned the effect on the source spectrum. The growth here at 3 kilohertz or 2 kilohertz is much greater, because the source spectrum slope is very much dependent on subglottal pressure. Yeah. So this, another aspect of this is, of course, that if you make measurements on the voice and forget to calibrate the sound level of your recording, then you are handicapped, because you can't really tell very much relevant information about the voice if you don't know what the loudness was. And if you are doing voice research, subglottal pressure is a key concept for all measures of voice source. Okay, now I would like to turn to the topic of my talk, and I thank you for your patience, but I didn't hear any protest. So good. Okay, let's go on. Glottal adduction is the tool for varying phonation type, as I told you in the beginning. And let's see what effect of varying glottal adduction has on the flow glottogram. Well, you could make an expectation about that, because the glottal adduction is how firm you press the vocal folds together. And if you press them hard together, you could predict that they won't love to make big excursions to the side. They would hurry back to go to contact, and they won't go far away from each other. Okay, so we could expect then that varying glottal adduction will have a lot of effect on the flow glottogram. And back again to the oscilloscope, and start it. Where do I have it? There. Run. And yes, run. Yeah. And now I should vary glottal adduction. I could have neutral phonation, normal speaking voice, and then I could have a more breathy phonation. Oh dear, yeah, I can't have the trigger there. I need to have running. So you see that there's a lot of air going through the glottis, even when the vocal folds come as close as they come in breathy phonation. And then I could increase glottal adduction, and then you will see the curves slowly going down to eventually touch I should have that a bit lower, I thought. There, it's good. Okay, this is zero flow. And then I could probably, if I go with glottal closure, I could probably have the scope sitting somewhere triggered there. Okay, we have a lot of variability in the shape of the flow glottogram when we vary glottal adduction, that is for sure. Back again. So here we have some organized examples. Glottal adduction is here weak, and we get a breathy voice. So glottal airflow here, and then we have time there. And then in kind of singer voice, which I call flow phonation, moderate glottal adduction and high pulses, but here we have no closed face, here we have a closed face. And then in normal conversational speech, like that, neutral phonation type and firm glottal adduction, a very firm glottal adduction. In pressed phonation, hyperfunctional is what voice people call it in clinics. So you see a huge variation. Okay. And then one of the great aspects that is varying is the pulse amplitude, as you could see. Okay. And also the slope of the trailing end of the pulse, the MFDR, and also the closed face, short in breathy, longer in closed, longer in closed in neutral, and very long in closed face. Okay, so that is the phonation types. This is, of course, a continuum. So you could continuously travel from breathy to pressed, breathy to pressed, and that means then that you could use it for expressive purposes. Everything that you could use continuously is useful for expression. Okay, summarizing here, the effect of varying glottal adduction on flow glottogram is, we saw it on pulse amplitude, closed face, and MFDR, and there are also on other aspects. On spectrum, yes, here's another thing. Let us look at what it does to the spectrum. You have here, I plot the level of the voice source fundamental, the fundamental of the voice source spectrum. And here I have the pulse amplitude. And this is data. This is clean data from singers. They were singing in breathy phonation, neutral phonation, pressed phonation, and flow phonation. And you could see that the pulse amplitude is extremely highly correlated with the amplitude of the voice source. When I talked to Martin Rottenberg, we proudly presented these results to him. He said, well, that is self-evident. Why did you ask it? Because, I mean, if you think like a Fourier guy would think about this waveform, of course, this must be the fundamental is very sensitive to this shape of the curve. So, but anyway, it is very nice when things are so closely correlated. Pulse amplitude determines the level of the voice source fundamental. And now I would like you to invite you to enjoy listening to how it sounds when you vary the voice source fundamental. And I would then like Madde and the spectrum to appear. And here I have the voice source fundamental. So I could, let's go up higher in frequency, so I could get hold of it and make it stronger. There we go, and there, it could be stronger and it could be weaker. And this has a strong effect on the timbre, on the voice timbre. So
are we supposed to be hearing it now?
Yes, you should hear it now. We'll take it. Okay. So I think we could recognize this effect. It sounds a bit more shallow, or yeah, something that you could invent a term for, but it is actually the amplitude of the fundamental that was varied now. Flow glottogram measures, yeah, so we have the pulse amplitude, and the pulse amplitude determines the amplitude of the voice source fundamental, and it varies with the phonation type. So phonation type is controlled by glottal adduction. It affects the pulse amplitude, it affects the closed face, and it affects the MFDR. So Gunnar Fant and Paavo Alku independently arrived at fascinating ratio that should reflect, that should provide a measure of glottal adduction, and that is the pulse amplitude divided by the maximum flow declination rate. And as life is short, you need to have some abbreviations. So that ratio is called the NAC, normalized amplitude quotient. It is it is varied with glottal adduction, and it is called NAQ, normalized amplitude adduction. We will see how it varies. Here is results from singers who were asked to sing in breathy phonation, in neutral phonation, and in pressed phonation. And here is what their NAC is doing. They decrease, as you saw in my demonstration. And you could also see that different singers don't produce curves that sit on each other. They are spaced in NAQ. And I think that is because people don't have the same length of their vocal folds. If you have long vocal folds, they open a big area, and that will produce a big airflow pulse. And if you have short vocal folds, the opening area will be smaller, and the air pulse must then be smaller. Another things that is varying with phonation type and adduction, that is the level difference between the first and the second harmonic of the voice source spectrum. And you see a similar behavior here of the 4 or 5 singers. Okay, so the H1, that is the harmonic number 1, that is the partial number 1, and that is then weaker in pressed phonation. So it's basically telling the same story. Okay, here's another quote from a study I did with Margareta Thaddeus, Paavo Alku, and Erkki Wilkman some decades ago. It is the glottal compliance. And the glottal compliance is the inverse of the glottal resistance. And resistance of the glottis, that is the ratio between the flow and the pressure. If the flow is small and the pressure is high, the resistance is of course high. Is that correct? It must be the flow over the subglottal pressure. flow over pressure. Flow is small, and yeah, you figure it out if you think about it. Okay, anyway, that is compliance is how much air they deliver for a given subglottal pressure. And that is nicely correlated with mean rating of precisedness in percent of visual analog scale. And you could also look at the NAQ, the normal amplitude quotient, even more correlated. I have been trying to replicate these values, but it is a bit difficult if you mix different people, you get a bit more blurred correlations. So, and I think that again depends on the mechanical properties of the vocal folds and the size of the length of the vocal folds. Okay, that's it. Voice source and emotional expressivity. Yeah, that is, I said a minute ago, I remember it still, that if we have something that we could vary continuously, it is a useful tool for expressivity. Stepwise is not so expressive as is continuous change. So what do we have here? Here we have pulse amplitude, yes, pulse amplitude and emotional expressivity. And I tell you what we did. It is a study that I did with Klaus Scheer, psychologist in Switzerland, and Klausia Salomao, logopedist in Sweden. We had 3 world-known baritone soloists singing a scale, an ascending scale, portraying a sad mood, a tender mood, a calm mood, a joyful mood, contempt, fear, pride, love, arousal, anger, and neutral. Okay, so here we see the deviation from the singer's average pulse amplitude over all these 11 emotional colors. And it is, I must confess that I found this very, very interesting. Here you see one singer, and he has pulse amplitude that is very low in sad, and it is quite high in anger. I think the sign is wrong here. We had a strong fundamental here and a weak fundamental here, because this is upset. Okay, but the pattern of his was quite continuous, because I ordered the emotions like that way, and then I projected these other singers' data on the same order of emotional colors, and I got quite different. On the other hand, I see joy, contempt, and fear, and anger. They are high, so they have a low amplitude of the voice source fundamental. And tender, calm, sad, they are hanging on the low side here. So that means that they have a strong fundamental. Okay, the essence of this was that actually the voice source is used for expressive purposes, and we don't need to have the same code. Maybe we have the same code, but there are different shades of sadness, there are different shades of anger, and there is different shades of all kinds of emotion, which makes the area of emotion and voice quite complex area of research. But anyway, so here again, I think to find out what the finer aspects of this expressivity code is, we would need to have high-phi synthesis and very systematically and find out how we could convince our perceptual system to hear sadness and joy and so on synthesized singing or say synthesized speech. Yeah, that is expressivity. So summarizing now, voice source is relevant from a clinical point of view, as I said in the beginning. It is pedagogically relevant for optimizing phonatory function, and it is also quite important for expression, a tool for vocal expressivity. And comment, why is this research? All the research I have talked about here is done with singer subjects. And when I was much younger, I met SLPs, speech and language therapists and logopeds. And they said, oh yeah, but it doesn't pay to spend time on analyzing the voice of singers because they are so very special. So forget that. Work with disturbed voices instead. That's more realistic. But on the other hand, singers are. It is necessary to use singers if you have. If you need consistent subjects. The same instrument is in speech and singing, but the different use. And speech is always improvised, and at least in conversations, and it is systematically controlled in singing. Otherwise, you can't sing. You can't sing convincingly if you have an uncontrolled voice and voice source. Singers are preferable subjects for voice research because they are, speakers are erratic and inconsistent, and you need consistent and replicable singers, replicable voices if you want to do research. So voice source analysis requires consistent vocal behaviors in singers. And I think you have seen that you get quite organized data that you could describe by equations if you work with singers, and that is much more troublesome in working with untrained voices. Okay, so that is the end of my little demonstration, and I want to thank to Paulina for this chance to talk about the voice source, artistically, pedagogically, and clinically, the most important aspects of the voice. And that was the end of my talk. But maybe I could hear some questions from you all. I will